Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we discuss the connection between mental health and faith. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Stanford, CEO of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute in Houston, Texas.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Maddie Stiers, Chief Clinical Officer of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. We're so glad you're joining us today.
Each week, we explore personal stories, expert insights, and the profound ways faith can influence our mental well-being. Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. I'm Matt Stanford here with Maddie Stiers. How are you today, Maddie?
Good. I'm really excited about the topic today.
Yeah, this is a great suggestion that you had. I do get asked a lot about the idea of mindfulness. What is it and what isn't it? And I know that we use it in all of our therapeutic interventions here at the Hope and Healing Center. So I think this is a great topic. It's certainly something that is kind of on the minds of individuals out there that are interested in mental health. So maybe if we to start out with you giving us kind of a definition of mindfulness and kind of explain the significance of it in relationship to mental health.
Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing I want to say when talking about mindfulness is, instead of giving a definition of what it is, I want to say what it is not. I think there's a big misconception that people hear mindfulness and they think of a very kind of Eastern way of practicing meditation or something, and that it's this very Zen. You have to be, your mind is empty and you're sitting there very aware, or with a blank mind, and that's just not the reality. Mindfulness is the act of consciously focusing your mind on the present moment. Oftentimes in our day and age, we are so mindless. We're moving through the day, kind of en route, getting things done, not paying attention to what's happening in that exact moment. So mindfulness is taking the time, and it's a practice of actually being conscious of the moment, observing what's happening, and being present in the moment, in the current day, not in the past, not in the future. Meditation is a practice of mindfulness, but it's a type of mindfulness practice, but they're not
right.
One in the
So
same.
you'd say mindfulness, there are a lot of different techniques related to mindfulness.
Absolutely.
But the concept of mindfulness itself is really just being in the moment, focusing on the moment, not allowing your mind to drift to what you ought to be doing this afternoon, or if you're doing what you had for breakfast, but you're in the moment. Because just as a human myself, I think we all realize that most of the time we're not thinking about what's going on in the moment. Now. We're thinking about something else. We're in the future, or we're in the past. And if you think about anxiety, for instance, anxiety is oftentimes an issue of a person kind of living in the future. They're worried about what's going to happen,
right.
and they're not able to kind of move beyond that. So how is mindfulness incorporated into treatments or counseling?
So it's incorporated in many different ways. The primary way I think about it is in learning how to practice mindfulness and learning what it means, and then understanding that there's different ways to go about doing mindfulness. So we talk about the what and how skills of mindfulness. The what skills are what you're actually doing during a mindfulness practice, and the how skills are how you're doing that. So the what skills are observe, describe, participate. So in the moment, you're observing what's happening, your sensations. You can only observe using your senses. Then you describe it by putting words to it, either in your head or out loud. And then you participate by jumping into the moment and saying, okay, I'm here in this practice. This is what I'm doing. I'm participating. I'm choosing to observe and describe and be in this moment. How you're doing that is non-judgmentally. So good judgments, bad judgments, taking that away. Just being aware of what you're experiencing, what your senses are telling you. One mindfully is focusing on that one thing. So when your mind goes, oh, okay, wait, but I got to record this podcast later today, or I've got to do this, you go, no, let me bring that right back to what am I actually focusing on? And then effectively is you're trying your best to be present in that one moment. So we teach these skills through therapy. That's a very detailed way of understanding mindfulness, to help people be present in the moment. So if we have some trauma or stress that has happened in the past, and we're constantly ruminating on that and going back to that. Practicing mindfulness can bring someone into the present moment. Same with future stress, anxieties, like you were talking about. Practicing mindfulness brings them back to the present moment. And that's important in problem solving and learning how we want to make changes and set goals and work towards future goals. When we're stuck in the past or looking towards the future, we're not able to make effective changes today in what we're doing to work towards our ultimate goals of either wellness or whatever that may be.
Right. Now, as I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking that our listeners are listening to you describe, really was a very kind of brief description of mindfulness techniques and skills and learning that. That sounds like a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you kind of give our listeners an idea of what kind of an individual, that's in a kind of therapy, who would benefit from this? What are the kind of problems they're struggling with? And it's a lot of work because, it probably took years for them to come to where they are now with the problems that they have. So they've learned a lot of bad habits. They have a lot of kind of ingrained kind of ways that they do things. As you're talking, I was thinking a lot about relationships. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of times really when we talk in a general sense about trying to be aware and in the moment. We're I need to listen to the person, what they're actually saying, as opposed to be thinking about what I'm going to say and not listen to anything. So that's probably the only introduction most people in the general population ever had to a mindfulness moment, is that you should listen to the person that's talking to you and not be thinking about what you're going to say. And we're really bad at that. So kind of maybe talk a little bit about the kind of problems that you mentioned a few different things: depression, anxiety, emotional regulation. But what is kind of the process or the progress or that is made by the individual over time? How long does it take for a person who's, say, struggling with problems managing their emotions? What is the intensity? How often do they meet? How much do they have to practice? I mean, it sounds kind of almost like a physical therapy thing, but kind of for your mind.
Daily. It is not an easy practice. So there are types of mindfulness practice that are easier for some people than others. Like for me, meditation, sitting in a quiet room, is not my thing. I would much rather do a different type of more active mindfulness practice. But everyone has to find their own kind of preference, what they really enjoy. And then just doing it is, one, figuring out what kind of mindfulness practice you like. And I'll go through what some options could be here in a bit. Then practicing it every day when you don't necessarily need it, right? So it's practicing it, implementing the mindfulness when you're not totally stressed out, when you're doing okay, to make it become a habit. And then practicing it when you're actually in need of it. Maybe you are ruminating or you're stuck on the future and whatnot. And then it becomes habitual, but it's a daily practice. So
right.
It's a lot.
The idea is you're trying to learn how to think and focus your attention in a right way, a normal way, what we would consider a normal way, not the way you have been doing it. That's right. You're not trying to teach somebody something, quote unquote, new, in the sense that this isn't the way this is some kind of, different idea out there. This is how we should think. This is how we should interact. This is how we should regulate our emotions. And the individuals that are struggling with these types of things are unable to do that. They've learned bad habits or things like that. And so that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to help them kind of learn how to properly regulate.
Yeah, to understand that what we're trying to do is help people understand that our minds become so busy and chaotic that we are not mindful, which makes living life really challenging if we're not aware of how mindless we've become. It can impact our ability to recognize our emotions, our own thoughts, even our own behaviors. It negatively impacts our mental health. It can impact our physical health. It impacts our relationships. So what we're teaching is not this like new way of thinking, like what you're saying. There's not some secret that we're not telling you all
Right,
the
it's not
listeners.
some hidden knowledge that you came up with or somebody came up with And now you're we need to get people to start doing this.
Yeah, it's really learning how to, in a very simplified way, learning how to pause your mind, hone in on one thing, and be able to move forward with that. Now, when you're doing a practice, it's something like listening to sound like waves or something, and you're focusing on that. But the way you see it play out in your life is once you've learned how to not let the chaos and the extreme noise of our mind overwhelm you, you can pause and think about what the challenge is that you're experiencing in life and how can you move forward in a way that's going to be effective towards your relationships, your emotions, whatever that might be. So it can feel a little intangible when we're talking about mindfulness because it's our thoughts, it's what's going on inside of our head. But I think maybe if I give an example, it might.
Yeah, well, give an example. Maybe give an example of a particular mindfulness technique or skill that you teach here in either our CBT or a DBT program, and then maybe talk about something more simplistic that someone might be able to integrate into their daily life.
Yeah.
Whether they're struggling with something or not.
So I think some of the what and the how skills that I just went through are definitely things that we're talking about here in our different therapy programs. It breaks it down very, very detailed on how we are practicing mindfulness. Now, you don't necessarily need to know that level. Not everyone needs to know that level of mindfulness. I think it's really helpful to think like, what are you doing and how are you doing it very specifically? And we go into all those details in therapy, and you could find a therapist out there that could walk you through this as well. DBT is a great therapy for that. An easy practice of mindfulness, one that I like to explain what mindfulness is because it really sticks in people's mind. You can feel all the different parts of your body. We don't think about it. We just don't think about it often, right? So for all of you listeners out there right now, think about your tongue. And you can feel it in your mouth. It's just kind of sitting there, right? Maybe you can move it around, but you can feel your tongue in your mouth. And now you might be uncomfortable noticing that you can feel your tongue in your mouth. But in those few moments just now where I've had you focus on the tongue in your mouth, what else were you thinking about? The listeners can't answer, but usually the answer that we get is nothing. I was thinking about how weird it is that I can feel my tongue in my mouth. That's a really easy, simple mindfulness practice. The purpose is to bring you into the present moment and be conscious of what you're doing in that moment. And in that sense, if that's what you just did listening to me, you practice mindfulness effectively. It gets you away from all the chaos, the hustle and bustle, and the rest of your day to day. But that's a very simple one. There's much more extensive ones. I don't like people think of yoga as a mindfulness practice. It doesn't have to be an hour-long class of mindfulness. It can be 5 seconds.
Right. Now, one of the things I would say is, I think a lot of people out there would say, well, everybody's busy. Everybody's got stuff going on, and but only a small number or a small percentage of the population has mental health problems. Mm-hmm. So we all understand that we can a lot of times our doctors will say, well, you need to, reduce stress in your life. And obviously, if you're more focused in the moment, you're not worried about other things or ruminating on things, then that's going to reduce stress. So what would be the difference, say, between, and I guess maybe I'm asking for more of a clinical example from you, somebody that you'd be working with therapeutically, that would be coming to a clinic for treatment versus somebody just in the general population that's just I think all of us could benefit for some mind, we certainly, if I were to say we could benefit from doing relaxation techniques daily to learn how to relax, we certainly all could benefit from some mindfulness skills to help us focus more on the moment. What would really be the difference, say, between a person that just is kind of stressed out and needs to reduce stress in their normal life versus somebody that comes in and has a mental health problem and mindfulness is important there? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think for someone who doesn't have a diagnosis or may not be struggling as much with their mental health, mindfulness practice is great. They may have that built into their kind of self already. They've been modeled that. They're able to be a little bit more aware of what they're experiencing and how they're interacting with the world. someone who's extremely depressed, has major depressive disorder, and is coming in here and barely got out of bed this morning, they're not focused on the day or the moment the way other people are. They're struggling to just get by, right? And so they may not be aware of what they're doing that their depression is causing them to do that is kind of exacerbating or continuing these negative symptoms or not helping towards finding a solution. So for someone who's really struggling with their mental health, mindfulness comes in kind of at step one of really just, what did you do today? Are you even aware of what you did today? Mm-hmm. Can you even kind of tell me and remember? Like, are we going to have to do mindfulness practices multiple times throughout the day, just so you can come in and report and remember what was going on?
Would you say that's because they're so overwhelmed by the symptoms of their disorder that they're kind of not present where they are? Whereas, say, someone just out there in the general population that just has a busy life, they're kind of overwhelmed by the external things that are going on around them.
Yeah.
I ask this way because I'm just kind of, we could be having a conversation right now about muscle relaxation. We could be talking about how you do relaxation techniques, and we use those in therapeutic environments with people who have mental health problems, but also anybody in the general population. Sure. So I want to let people understand that these are techniques that are benefit anyone's mental health, but they're used in a little bit more intensive and specific way within the therapeutic session.
Right. We have exactly for someone who maybe isn't worried so much with the hustle and bustle that's going on inside their brain because it's depression that's kind of hit them. It's a numbing that they're doing. They're kind of they're in an avoidance stage. They're just trying to get through the moment, which is kind of a mindfulness practice, but in a way that's not productive or helpful for them. And so it's moving away from mindfulness helps us move away from coping mechanisms that have become maladaptive towards recognizing that they're maladaptive and implementing newer, healthier, more adaptive coping mechanisms.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that I hear, and you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, particularly from Christians, is some idea that mindfulness or these techniques, and then you actually mentioned yoga, which a lot of times is these types of things are all kind of linked together, that somehow this is an Eastern philosophy, this is an Eastern religion, that it's kind of working its way into us, and that it's going to taint or damage our faith in some way. Could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, I certainly know, and I would say that there's no doubt that things like meditation are more promoted within Eastern faiths as part of the faith. But plenty of people meditate, and it has nothing to do with religion. Mm-hmm. And when you described mindfulness at the beginning, you're certainly not talking about, at least what I've heard, are people's concern that their mind is being emptied in some way, and then somehow something might get in there, or something which, again, I don't necessarily understand what the thought there is, but let's just say that was the thought. Really, it's more of a focusing of your thoughts on the moment. So could you speak a little bit to maybe some of the concerns you've heard or things that people have said to you about their maybe their view of mindfulness from more of a faith perspective?
Yeah, I could understand someone's concern. Well, one, I hear this concern a lot that, well, I can't be mindful. I have to just sit here and think about nothing. I go, wouldn't that kind of be nice, though, if we could just not think about things? But almost impossible.
Yeah, well, don't think about nothing. Think about now.
Right.
I think that's really yes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so, but they come in with this concern that like they're never going to be able to reach, whatever mindfulness is, and I'm like, well, it's just a practice. It's not even something that you reach. Like you don't get to this like point of you are mindful. Like it's a continuous practice that you're doing every day, every moment to be living in the present moment. But people's concern are that they're not going to be able to do it, that, if it is this emptying of the mind, that something could come in and kind of infiltrate their thoughts or take over them. And that's, I can understand if that's what you think mindfulness is, your concern might be there, but that's just a misunderstanding of what mindfulness is.
And just because someone may have said, and again, I've heard the same thing you mentioned earlier. I've heard, well, these are the techniques of Zen Buddhism. Mm-hmm. what I just told you a moment ago, if you are always thinking about the future, you can't focus on the moment, and you need to like just sit down for a moment and kind of focus on the moment and be aware of what's going on around you right now. Well, there's mindfulness. That's a mindfulness technique right there. That doesn't sound Buddhist to me. It sounds kind of a-religious in some sense. There's no religion associated with it. People can certainly take any technique and they could associate a faith with it. So I would say that people have to be careful that just because someone has said, well, I meditate as part of my Eastern philosophy that I follow, that doesn't mean meditation in general is Eastern philosophy.
No.
So I think the same thing could be said for mindfulness. So maybe you could say some of the things you've heard people say to you or concerns they've had in addition to what you said already.
Well, I think what you just said sums up a lot of what I hear in relation to like mindfulness practice and their Christian beliefs, or, they don't want to be straying from that. But really, when we think about contemplative prayer, that in a sense is it is a mindfulness practice. It is somewhat a meditative practice. And that's a Christian practice.
Oh, absolutely. Meditation is mentioned in the Bible many times, especially in the Psalms.
Yeah. So I kind of go back to that. And there's ways to practice mindfulness that can be secular. And there's ways to practice mindfulness that can be more honed into what your belief system is.
Right, and that the same thing could be just said of therapy in general.
Right,
absolutely.
Yeah,
so no, I think that's a good way to think about it. And I think that a person always has to be aware of what their therapist, how they view faith. Unfortunately, most therapists don't incorporate faith in any context within therapy or counseling. And certainly, I would imagine that if there are people out there that are listening that have been to therapy, they may have actually been involved in mindfulness techniques with their therapist or counselor and practiced them and not even known that's what they were. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know that a lot of times we go, okay, well, we're going to do mindfulness now. We might, but we also might say, hey, you know what? It seems like you really focus on the future a lot. And so maybe we can work on some of that negative thinking around that. And let's just, give you a few ideas of how you might, and the word mindfulness never comes up, and then we're going to practice this kind of a thing.
Right, they just kind of jump into it. So some examples of that might be listening to music. I don't know if you've ever been in therapy and you've had a therapist tell you, just, if you're feeling down, put on some music that makes you happier, is a little bit more lively, and people kind of roll their eyes and go, okay, yeah, that's really going to help. Well, it doesn't change everything overnight, but it is a way of practicing mindfulness to bring yourself into the present moment. You're not thinking about the past. You're not worried about the future. And you're able to say, I like this song right now. Something about it, the tempo, the words, the memories with it, make me feel good. So you're aware of your thoughts. You're aware of your emotions. Maybe you're dancing, so you're more aware of that. In that moment, you're practicing mindfulness. You're not thinking about 1,000 different things. You're focused on one specific thing. And the purpose of that is kind of twofold: to practice mindfulness, to hone in on that skill of being able to live in the present moment. And two, to give us a little bit of a reprieve from the stresses of life, past stuff, day-to-day stuff, future stuff. Because when you're actually practicing mindfulness, if you're doing it correctly, you are only focused on that one practice. So your brain may stray to think about, oh, yeah, I've got this report at work, or I got to go do this thing, I'd pick up the laundry, or whatever it may be. But if you're practicing it, you're going, oh, there go my thoughts. Let me bring them back. And what am I doing right now here in this moment? So it's the purpose of it is to help you be more present so you can live a happier, more fulfilled life. And some of the skills I think people have been modeled and can do that based on what they've seen in their life growing up. And sometimes you have to come to therapy to learn it.
Well, I also would say, as we get toward the end here, I also would say that, I think with most mental illnesses, at least the kind of the big three that we kind of think of type of thing. But if you're thinking about anxiety, you're thinking about depression, you're thinking about even psychotic disorders, those problems tend to put your mind somewhere other than in the moment. Mm-hmm. You're in another reality. You're in the past. You're trapped in the past. Say like with something like post-traumatic stress disorder, you're trapped in your trauma and you're reliving it over and over and over. with something like a more anticipatory types of anxiety where you're worried about the future. You can't stop thinking about the future. Depression is kind of a past event. You're worthless. You have no value. You're in this dark place, and it's not the reality. It's not where you really are physically.
Sure.
And so all of those are helped by this idea of being in the moment. But certainly relationships are benefited by that, because anyone out there has undoubtedly engaged somebody who, when they were talking to them, they were nowhere near physically present with them
Right.
as they were talking to them. And that's not a very good way to form a relationship or maintain
A really good image of someone doing the opposite of mindfulness is kind of what you just said. I'm sure everyone listening has been in a conversation with someone, and you can just tell they are not listening to anything you're saying. Maybe they're trying, they're maybe even making eye contact, but their brain is somewhere else. They're thinking about what they're going to say to you. They're thinking about something that they got to do, and you're kind of going, "Oh, this is rude," right? Rude or not, that's someone not practicing mindfulness, which I think
And that may be that they are, like you said, they may just be rude. They may just not be interested, and so they're thinking about something else, or they may have a problem that doesn't really allow them to be in the moment. So it's a great example, because it helps everybody understand, because we've all done it, we've all had it done to us. That's not a good way to be. So imagine if you were like that all the time and you weren't able to bring yourself into the moment. That causes you to be not fully functional.
It causes, there's ripple effect through all areas of your life. I think the other thing to point out is that, we're talking about how great mindfulness is, and it can be wonderful. It's a great practice to get into. It's not a cure-all, and it's not the only thing that someone should be doing.
Absolutely.
It's in conjunction with other forms of therapy, other aspects of therapy, medication, continuing to go to your faith communities, your faith service. I mean, it's not, and I think anything we talk about on the podcast really is.
It's one technique, or it's, as we say a lot of times around here, it's one tool in a tool belt.
Right.
And no mechanic, no gardener only has one tool. You can't fix everything with a hammer.
Right.
So it's just one. And even then, depending on what the issue is, mindfulness may or may not be that important of a tool, depending on what you're dealing with. But I do think everybody has the opportunity to kind of benefit from these very simple mindfulness techniques to help them kind of be more present, even if you're just forcing yourself to be more aware of where your mind is, kind of moment to moment, or taking an inventory of, well, how present am I throughout the day? What am I thinking about? What do I focus on? Particularly someone, if you lay down at night and all you're thinking about is all the things you have to do tomorrow, well, I know that affects your sleep.
Sure.
And certainly that's a moment to say, hey, you know what? I'm not present. I'm somewhere, I'm in the future. And I need to get back to where I am right now. And so I do think they could be beneficial. So, hey, check it out. Look up some stuff on mindfulness. But again, don't be swayed by someone saying, oh, well, this is bad because it's this, or this is bad because it's that. These are techniques. They're useful. They're beneficial. We use them here at the Hope and Healing Center. And they are very effective for people that struggle with mental health problems, but they're also very effective for people who are. You have any closing thoughts?
I don't know. There's so much to be said about mindfulness. I think just what you said, if you're interested in learning more about it, look it up online. But if you're working with a therapist, ask them, like, what are some of their suggestions for mindfulness practices? I mean, the reality is it can be anything. You can make anything a mindfulness practice.
Right.
If you're doing it, one mindfully focused on that.
What
single
helps you
activity.
become presently aware?
And it's finding things. Don't get discouraged if you start working through this and you go, I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like what my therapist is suggesting. See if you can take a different sort of activity that you normally would do and make it into something that you're focused specifically on. And yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thanks for joining us today, and join us next time on the Madness and Grace podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this conversation, we would love it if you would rate us and leave us a review. Lastly, sharing this podcast with a friend or a family member is a great way to give hope to those who may be struggling with a mental health concern. See you next time as we discuss madness and grace.